All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Welcome everybody. I'm Michael Davis. I'll be the one presenting to you. Today we're going to talk about how manufacturing technology has evolved and what that means for manufacturers. Just quickly, a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Michael Davis. I've been in manufacturing for about 6 years, and currently in my role as a sales engineer with MECCO for just over 2 years. Like I said before, a couple of things with housekeeping. I've got the chat on the right-hand side. If you see that, if as we go through this, you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'll reach out to you. I'll answer those as soon as I can. This webinar will be about 20 minutes, and we'll open the floor for questions. If at the end of this webinar you like what you hear or like what you see, you can go on to mecco.com/webinars. We have a couple other ones there, and we'll constantly be updating those. You can follow us on social media or subscribe to our e-newsletter to find those. Additionally, tomorrow we'll be sending out a webcast version of this that you can share with anyone as you see fit. So what we're going to do as we get started here today, you're going to learn quickly. We'll go over the direct part marking and the evolution of that, how those modern marking has improved the manufacturing process, and Industry 4.0, what that means and how you as a manufacturer can get there. So to start, part marking through the years, it really started as basic as you could possibly get, which is hand stamping. Just using a hammer and beating the letters in. The problem with this was that the benefit is that it gave you the ability to count parts, but it was very labor intensive, very limited variants. You couldn't put too much data in there because it was just so time consuming. And then obviously there were many safety concerns with having a person swinging a hammer. The stamps for a long time would explode, things like that. So that really brought in the roll or punch press, which made it much safer, but still very limited. It was more automated, but it was still very limited on what you could put on there. Basic serialization, but no barcoding or anything like that. Barcoding advent in the 70s brought in the labels and dot peen. Dot peen was a much more efficient, cost-effective way to mark your parts. You had the ability to automate inline, meaning that you didn't have to have an operator doing any of the work. You had the ability to put QR and 2D data matrices on the part, and then also bring in your data integration, which when you have data integration will allow you to really understand what's going on in your manufacturing process. And then last, the most recent innovation would be the lasers. So you have the ability to dynamically track your parts, any sort of data that you could possibly imagine. You can run through querying from a database or back and forth to a database. You have the same ability to automate inline like a dot peen. But because you can enclose these and they're much quieter, they're much safer, and then you can do a lot more variant with cosmetic marking, which is something that, as we see going forward, tons and tons of people are getting more involved in. So why do manufacturers today mark their parts? Really, it breaks down into a couple fields: branding and aesthetics. So, when we as manufacturers are building products, we want to be proud of that product, and we want our consumers to be proud of the product. So you're marketing to them to say, hey, look, you trust us as a manufacturer to build your product. That's why you're buying from us. So that's one reason. More on the internal aspect would be part identification and part tracking. Knowing what type of part you have and where that part is key to a successful manufacturing process. We work with a company that builds parts, and the parts are so similar. They're about 3 thou off, which makes it almost optically impossible to tell what that part is. So by having that serial number or batch number on there, they can track, and they'll be able to tell what that part is and make sure they're not sending it to the wrong location or to the wrong customer. As that part goes through and you are able to sandblast it, paint it, things like that, you have the tracking to prevent you from, let's say, painting before you sandblast, where if that part gets out to your customer, they're not going to be happy, or you'll just have to rework it and that costs the company money. So all of those things really drive the marking. And then the last thing you have is the high level component traceability. So when you're talking about part tracking, you're talking about going through and marking it for internal use. But when you talk about component traceability, we're talking every component in a subassembly and an assembly being put in there together and then tracked not only internally, but also once it leaves the facility, so that if it ever comes back for rework, or if it ever has an issue where someone's saying that it was outside of the spec, you can go back and look at that component traceability and say, well, we took the data, we know that it passed QC. So then it becomes, was the QC wrong, or was there something else going on there? And then, the last but definitely not the least, when we're marking parts, is counterfeiting. So one of the things that we see in this industry as manufacturers is counterfeiting. And by having traceability, we can mitigate the financial impact of counterfeiting and recalls. So just kind of consider these statistics. In 2017, Border Patrol has said that counterfeit seizures has grown by 538%, which according to a 2018 study was $1.2 billion in seized goods. And then counterfeiting reports among aerospace and defense electronic parts distributors rose 142% between 2005 and 2008. So counterfeiting is a huge deal, and it's about $500 billion worth of lost goods, but from counterfeiting. So the counterfeiting doesn't only cost your company money and lost revenue, but it also can hurt your brand and trust with your consumers through gray market. We work with a company that does electronics, and they found that hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of their product was being purchased, rebranded, and resold as a similar product with a higher voltage rating. Because they didn't have the data to say where that serial number corresponded to, they were issuing warranties on these parts because they were unaware that the parts were being used in a way that wasn't supposed to be used. How can we prevent things like that? There's two kind of ways. So the level one way would be just putting a basic, barcode or 2D data matrix on the part that traces back to the serial number. That'll give you a lot of ability to prevent that, but adding in things like a covert mark in a discrete location, as small as 200 microns wide, gives you the ability to prove if those match or if someone messed with anything on the part. The higher level way would be using something known as a 2DMI, which is an encrypted mark with unique identifiers, and those identifiers prevent the counterfeiter from ever being able to replicate it because they are encrypted. Another thing to think about is mass recalls. So when we're talking about the cost of not having traceability, according to a study in 2016, OEM suppliers for automotive had a total of $10.3 billion in warranty and recalls. If you're familiar with Takata, this was the largest safety recall in US history. They had to recall 63 million airbags. Takata ended up paying about $100 per airbag just for the fix. And then additionally, once the fines and everything were levied, the total cost for Takata was around $15 billion. So, this is a huge deal when we're talking recalls. So the biggest thing is limiting the recalls. We worked with a company who came to us because they build PCBs, and their supplier had issued a recall on 1,500 components that went on the boards. 1,500 components on PCBs, that's not a whole lot, but where the problem arose was they didn't identify which batch of components went with which board. So they had to recall 9,800 boards to identify which ones had faulty components. That means that they recalled 6 times the amount of product that they would have had to if they knew where the products were coming from. And that's not all. I mean, lack of insufficient traceability can lead to mistakes in the manufacturing process, defective materials, lack of inventory control, legal liabilities, late deliveries, and then just not knowing what's going on with your manufacturing process. that brings us to, the future of part marking and manufacturing, and that's what we call Industry 4.0. For those of you who don't know what Industry 4.0 is, it's the fourth iteration of the Industrial Revolution, and it's really driven by data. Data is the new oil. That's a very common phrase that's stated, and there's a reason for that. I mean, there's a reason why social media companies are billion-dollar companies, because we've realized how important data is, not only to our everyday lives, but for decision making in general. For the manufacturing side, a connected track and trace system allows you to view data and information in real time, analyze that data, and make meaningful improvements. When we're talking about this, I want to be very clear. We're talking about direct part marking and complete traceability. So when we're talking complete traceability, the reason we need direct part marking is because harsh conditions such as painting, galvanizing, brazing of any sort will deplete a mark that's non-permanent, rendering them unreadable. When we're talking cradle to the grave traceability, we want something that starts at the very beginning, goes through internally, but also can come back. So when we're talking about it, this is the level we're looking at. We're looking at cradle to grave, where it starts, each component, each subcomponent in the assembly is marked, and as it goes through the process, you're able to track the components and assemblies, have a database that is there, so that as the parts are getting checked, as they're going through the process, they're getting scanned in, scanned out to tell the process, hey, yep, it's correctly been done. If you're checking them against a QC spec, you're able to log what that spec was, so that if anyone ever comes back and you look at it, you can do root cause analysis to find, was our spec too loose, or was there something else going on with that? Once the component's out in the world, if it ever needs fixed or worked on, the data can come back and help you, and having a vision system to verify throughout makes it that much more applicable. So this sounds like a lot of stuff going on. So how do we get there? Well, I like to say the way you get there is the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stop, review, and strategize. What are your long-term operational goals? What are the trends that could change how your product's being made? Are there any new manufacturing regulations, standards that you'll have to comply with? So knowing these, that's a good start. That tells you how you're looking. With COVID, we saw what happens with supply chains, and knowing how your supply chains can be impacted. All of that can be done. So the first thing to do is get that information. Once we're getting that information, we decide, okay, what are we putting on the part? Are we doing something where it's a QR code that references a URL that can be dynamically queried as the part's going through? Are we just putting hard-coded data on there? Not everyone needs the very far future of this, but that's always an option to have. So once you've identified what information you're going to put on the part, it's what's the best marking equipment. We work with a variety of industries. Lasers are great, but they may not be the perfect application for 100% of people. There may be something where, based on your situation, dot peen marking is just the better, more effective approach, whether it's due to time or value that the mark requires. So kind of checking that off. Once you have that, then we can look at the database and the vision technology side. So having the database to where we can query that in. Most people already have an ERP. What level of ERP that really can start with where you supply and store data. The vision just verifies and makes sure that what we have is what we needed. As we're transitioning from our current project to our end goal, there's some considerations that you would need to think. If it was me, we're looking at ROI. The pandemic, led to this layer of the decision-making process and making sure that we have a quick ROI. So understanding that budgets are tight, trying to figure out what that budget looks like. If it's me as a customer, I want to know, does the company that I'm working with do operator training? Is it a one-person operation? Do they have virtual support if something like COVID continues where people can't come on site? So these are all things to think about. And one thing that MECCO has done this year to help with this transition is we developed the Light Rider, which is a cost-effective standalone unit for 20-watt fiber laser. It allows you to mark a wide range of parts, but also it gives you the ability to have a one-person operation that's easy to clean. And one thing I want to leave you with here is an example of a customer that adapted and gave us, this kind of cradle to the grave solution. So this customer was a die casting company. They needed to mark a 2D data matrix with a fast cycle time, have database integration and consistent readability. So they're working with the automotive industry, and they had to have an AIAG compliant mark. In the automotive industry, you have to grade out your marks to the Automotive Industry Action Group, which gives it basically says that you can't have lower than a B grading in supply. So they needed that, but they also wanted to build a high quality track and trace solution that integrated with their existing database. So what did we do here? We instead of using a standard off-the-shelf marking system, we developed a custom solution that built using pneumatic doors, a vision system, sensors, and pneumatic clamps to hold the part in place, and the fiber laser. So on this machine here, it was able to mark the code, send the code in, verify with the reader that the code was there. If the code did not work, it was unreadable, it would actually remark that code in place, preventing it from having that rework. And if it failed again, then you would have an operator or a quality control person come in to decide why that part's failing. So this is just kind of an example that really shows that database and bringing it back, being able to track that part through the process, but also out in the world. So again, I appreciate everyone coming out today. Is there anybody have any questions? Looks like, what kind of barcode is best to use for dot peen marking? Yeah, so with dot peen marking, there's a couple of variables. The first one is if the part is rounded, typically what we'll do is we'll do a QR or a 2D that's rectangular. Reason for that is marking on rounds, if you go beyond a certain percentage of the radius, the mark will be unable to be read. So typically a 2D or a QR code is what we would use there. It also helps with spacing out for if it gets painted or anything like that. What are the major differences between dot peen and laser marking? Good question. So really, I guess the major differences I would say is it's just application based. What's needed? Do you need a system that's just doing something depth, but the cosmetic look is a little bit lower quality, and the speed is most important with the depth? If that's the case, probably dot peen is going to be the most cost effective. Now, there's a lot of variables when we're talking about this stuff, but with laser marking, the biggest benefits you get is the speed of a mark that's a surface mark. The quality is typically much better. So if you're doing any sort of branding, any sort of just marks that you need to look the highest quality, typically laser will get you that, especially at the smaller characters. Let's see. How do you mark parts that are painted? Oh, good question. So really, this is kind of, it could go a couple ways. I'm assuming you're talking about laser parts, but with dot peen marks, we have customers that will mark them pre-paint or post-paint, and the marks are deep enough typically to survive those. I mean, not to get in the weeds too much, but 7 mil is pretty standard for us to be able to see that mark. If we're talking about laser marking, there's a couple things that you can do. The first is, if we're marking through the paint and removing the paint, that's pretty standard. But Another thing that we've done is mark the paint itself. So basically what you'll do is you'll wash out the color in the paint. So the coating is there for the resistance, rust resistant or oxidation resistance, but you're still putting that mark on the paint itself. What types of virtual training and support do you offer? Oh, good question. So we offer at MECCO, we're a partner, and in anything we do, we want to be your partner. So how we go about it is what fits best for you. Right now with COVID, I know everybody's probably tired of COVID, but we've done tons of virtual training. Myself, I have a colleague, Rose George and Brian Morgan. We are all always out helping virtually, just with anything that we can. We have our customer service team. They'll do that as well. If you want someone on site, typically we can set that up. So it really is just what you're looking for. We're also putting out videos, and we're trying to do these videos to help promote and give some of the common questions that we get, so that you don't necessarily have to reach out to someone every single time. You'll have that at your fingertips. Any other questions? All right. Well, I appreciate it, everybody. If you guys have any other like one-on-one questions or anything like that, you can go to MECCO.com. We'll have a drop down. It's in the yellow menu. You can set up a one-on-one with me to talk about like maybe a particular application or a particular question. If you do that today, we'll actually send you a free engraved pen with your name on it or whatever you'd like. So just let me know, and you'll be able to see my calendar and set it up. I appreciate everyone's time.